Welcome everyone to the Lift for Management webinar. My name is Fidan Karimova from the Water Research Foundation. Today we'll be introducing you to the Lift for Management project. Before we get started, just one housekeeping item. If you have any comments or questions, be sure to send them to the chat box. This way we'll be asking the questions of the speakers and I will be able to see the questions coming in. On the agenda today, we have Chelo Vitasevic, who is the PI of the project, Mike Barnett from SmartCloud, Scott Haskins from Jacobs, and Mark Poling from Clean Water Services. First off, to kick it off, the LIFT project, the LIFT program is Leaders Innovation Forum for Technology, and it's a WEF initiative that has been around for over 5 years to accelerate innovation in water and help move new water technologies into practice. The Lift for Management project fits under the LIFT umbrella and we'll walk you through how you can get engaged later on. But for now, I'll hand it over to Chelo Vitasevic to talk about the project itself.
Thank you, Fidan. I'll start at a little bit higher strategic level. The overall goal of an organization is to create value. To manage the creation of value, it is important to know three things: the why, the what, and the how. The answers to the question why describe the purpose of the organization, defined here in terms of providing value to customers, community, and the environment. The answers to what specify exactly how we will measure the value. And to answer the question how, we need to describe the business processes. What is the sequence and the logic of our tasks? Who is involved? What tools are used? Which decisions have to be made? And what information may be required? Next. Water sector utilities operate in a complex world, and I'll start with the why, which is the goals and the purpose. And they're expected to satisfy their customers and also many different stakeholders. The graphic in this slide describes a number of different goals. It's taken from a report by a utility, and it illustrates the complexity of addressing the concerns of many stakeholders. Next, please. The second aspect of value, the question of what, has been addressed in some industry efforts and initiatives, including effective utility management and the AWWA benchmarking study. Both of these were national level efforts that included participation of utilities and included consultants as well. Next, please. The third leg of that stool is the Lift for Management is focused on the how leg of the stool. However, we needed to start from a common overall concept of value, which is the what, so that we can establish a connection between what we need to do and how we can create value. During our first workshop on this project, the utility partners jointly defined the key elements in the top-level value chain, shown here at the top of the slide, applicable to water sector utilities. This is basically why people give us money, is not really to do legal work or IT or all these other things that we have to do to support the core mission. The different things that we do, all the business processes that utilities execute, should in some way impact these value components. In order to monitor and manage performance, we also need to define the key performance indicator that reflect the creation of value. A number of KPIs have already been defined by other research efforts that I've mentioned, like effective utility management, or AWWA utility benchmark initiatives. Next, please. To create value and achieve the organization's goals, individuals, interact within organizational structure to execute business processes. That's how we get our work done. The focus of Lift for Management is on the items in this red outline box. It's on how the value is created, on understanding how we perform work, how we document it, how we can analyze it, and how we can identify and implement improvement. Next, please. Within a water sector utility, we must perform many business processes on different timescales, from real-time monitoring and control to tactical processes such as maintenance, and finally strategic processes that consider long-term impacts on the organization. These processes are executed by many different business units across the organization, and managing such diverse tasks seems quite complex and scary. So what we wanted and needed was a conceptual model that would break down this complexity and provide a foundation for a structured method for analysis and improvement. Next. So this is a UAIM framework. The complexity and difficulty of coordinating different business units in executing different business processes has led to practices that are disconnected and technical solutions that are described as silos, or more kindly as cylinders of excellence, as my colleague Mark likes to quote. In order to better understand how the value is created and analyze ways to improve performance, it is useful to establish such a framework that considers these complexities within a holistic conceptual view. Too many times, when we're looking for a solution, we immediately turn to technology without thinking and considering the processes itself or the people in our approach. So this conceptual view helps us understand that the work is done by people, executing processes, and aided by technology, and is the foundation for our methodology, or UAIM. Next, please. So this is the mission statement for our project, and the first part that I mentioned is this framework for holistic analysis. And I will turn over the presentation to Mike Barnett to show you how we started addressing these things within the framework.
Okay, next slide, please, Fidan. So Chela mentioned that, that we have the framework, that's the matrix that you just saw. And then we have this challenge of trying to identify the best way to model the business processes that describe how work is done, and a methodology for how that improvement can proceed. And these tools that we have selected will help us achieve those goals. So if we move to the next slide, please. As a reminder, we just saw this a couple of slides ago, but the process column in the center is our focus for business process modeling. The important feature is that these models are layered. So at the very top, we would expect at a strategic level to see capital improvement program, planning processes, financial planning, facility design or redesigns that occur less frequently, but they are intended to drive those high-level activities that are required in every utility. And then at the middle level, at a tactical level, we would see, and you could think of these levels as a kind of hierarchical composition or decomposition. So contained in some higher level strategic process is a tactical process for fleet management, or a tactical process for asset management, operations planning, or project management, inspections, and business processes like that. And then at the lowest level, and remember we're talking about business processes, these are business processes, we would see specific operational and real-time control processes of a supervisory nature that directly interface with the hardware that is directly below that. So those processes, to model those processes, we need a set of tools to describe that, and the following slides will go through an example of that. So next slide, please. One of the case studies we did in phase 2 of the UAIM project was to look at the Orange County, Florida utility, look at a pump renewal and replacement program. And like many large utilities, Orlando has 774 pump stations, so they're important organizational utility assets that need to be maintained. They clearly are driving costs. They want to minimize those life cycle costs for the maintenance and repair of those. They want their business processes to be more proactive than they have in the past. And then the whole business process should encourage sustainability. So these are the key objectives that they were trying to achieve in their improvement process. And what you see in this slide is a business process model developed in a tool called Business Process Model and Notation. So we're going to go through a couple of slides here to highlight the key concepts, and we want to reinforce the understanding that the concepts are simple. There are concepts you are already familiar with. What the tool provides as a standard, and it's a public standard, is the ability to represent those business processes a little bit more rigorously than we might do in a process depiction tool like PowerPoint or some Visio templates. So what you see in this build of the slide are the swim lanes, and these identify, these are these rectangular cells that you see in the slide that identify the pump station crews at the top, the suppliers, the supervisor, the utility engineering group, and then the construction crews at the bottom. And those swim lanes identify the key responsible roles. If you are familiar with RACI diagrams and the RACI, which stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed, those primarily responsible for the business processes are identified in these swim lanes. So a simple concept, and then we have in our tool set the ability, you will see an icon of a person, for example, in the lower right with procurement consultant, section manager, and procurement. These are participants in the activities that they are connected to. So roles and participants are a key important concept in business process model and notation, and they're indicated with these swim lanes and these additional participants. So next slide, please, Fidan. And we'll show the other important concept is the tasks or activities. So these, everything you see, rectangle or rounded rectangle, the yellow rounded rectangles are activities that take place in these business processes, and they're connected in a workflow. And there is a specific syntax and meaning to the way the tool allows you to connect these activities together, and that helps us to understand a little bit more carefully what we're trying to achieve, either what we have in an existing process that we can analyze, or what we want to have in a future process or to-be model that we want to migrate to. So activities are the second important concept to keep in mind. If you go to the next slide, please. Now we see a very important concept in business process modeling. These are the diamond-shaped icons, which represent decisions that have to be defined. Understanding the decisions that drive business processes and their activities are very essential to understanding the flow of work and who's doing what and why they're doing it. And they become a very important part of making sure we've got the model correct. And we want to ensure that so that our understanding is clear. And if our understanding is clear, then it's easier to communicate the information, it's easier to document the information, it's easier to show the rest of the people in our team what's important. And then finally, what you've seen in this build slide are the systems and the databases that handle all of the data that's used in the business process. So we want to understand what those systems are, what activities they support, and what data do they need in order to drive the business process. Next slide, please. So what we've just gone through is a short list of the key concepts that are needed in business process modeling and the ones that we're using, the concepts that we're using in the UAIM project. This is what they describe. They describe who is involved in that business process in the swim lanes, the specific workflow and the sequence of activities that are allowed, the decisions, those diamond-shaped objects that tell us what needs to be decided, how it's decided, and who makes that decisions, the resources that are needed, both the people resources as well as the machines, the software, other resources that are needed in that process. In some of those slides, you may have noticed a document type of application or icon. If you just back up one slide there, Fidan, I'll move a little bit more quickly. Metrics are very important. So especially in the upcoming phase, what we want to do is make sure that metrics are defined and the data required for them as well as the systems. Next slide, please. So putting all of this together and thinking again of that middle column in the framework, the process column, and the hierarchical nature of it, we can create what's called a reference model. We'll create a water sector value reference model that is composed of all of these business processes in a layered fashion. The very top level is the value chain itself. That's a reminder to us that we're trying to drive value. And that at level 2, a very generic kind of description of the major processes that occur at higher strategic levels in the utility. And then at levels 3, 4, and higher, those would be detailed models that are specific to utilities. So what this allows us to do is give us a general view of the utility structure in terms of business processes at the higher levels, and then also allow us to plug in what's specific about every utility, the things that make them unique. This water sector value model, we created a version 1 of it in phases 1 and 2. And in the following phases, we'll refine this further to develop the water sector value model. Next slide, please. In the first and second phases, these are the people, the utilities that participated. There were also consultants that participated in the project, and we developed 10 use case studies or case studies that involved development using the UAIM methodology and business process model and notation, the development of as-is models, creation of to-be models, and then along with that, a methodology to show improvement. Next slide, please. So what we'll do in phase 3 is we'll continue to expand the number of case studies that are done, but a lot more intensively. And in doing that, we believe that the utilities and the utility partners require some expertise in terms of that business process model and notation. We'll provide that assistance and we'll help them to understand both the modeling tools as well as how they're applied in the UAIM methodology. Now, we also want to develop a portal, and the idea of the portal is to provide a repository for all of the case studies, for best practices, for the water sector value model itself, which will require some curation and reconciliation as we get new ideas and collect more information, best practices, and then also training materials. We would envision perhaps providing videos or giving short courses or providing slides that people utility partners and others that have access to the portal can refer to learn how to use the UAIM methodology and toolset. Okay, Cello, I think I will hand it over to you at this point.
Yes, thank you, Mike. So what Mike just showed us is that this part about our mission statement that has to do with documenting processes and an analysis framework, what happened there. But the models are not the end product. I mean, the purpose of the model is to help us improve performance. So the one thing I want to mention is that the utilities that did process modeling were basically developing documentation of their processes that they may have been interested, most of them were interested in improving, and they were curious to develop the documentation anyway. But this project provided a vehicle that brought on standard tools and ability to collaborate with others and so forth. So if we can go to the next slide, I will sort of put this in context, the improvement. The CMMI Institute developed a capability maturity model, and there are 5 levels of maturity. In the level 1, people know what they're doing, but maybe not, the knowledge is really in people's heads. On level 2, we have teams that are managed, and it allows us to scale up the work and share some of the responsibilities. Level 3 is standardized, when we have standard processes, measures, and training. Level 4 is predictable, which means that we manage process based on quantitative measurements. And then the last one is innovative. So what we're trying to do with the business process models is to move to the right in this model. And the key difference between these levels is how an organization gains, manages, and uses knowledge. And please note that within an organization, different business processes and different business units may be at different maturity levels. So in our phase 1, when we were developing water sector value model and standards for documenting the processes, we facilitated and enabled utilities to go from level 2 to level 3. Can we have the next slide, please? Sorry, I think we skipped. If you can just go back one slide. Yes, it looks similar, but it's a little bit different. So if you can just click once. Yes, there it is. So what the business process models can describe the existing processes, but we can also use them to identify improvements. So if we start from good documentation, which is Mark's level 3, we can define improvements and also define metrics to really facilitate the quantitative and predictable management of our business processes. So if we can go, so that was the focus of our phase 2. If we can go to the next slide, these are some of the business processes that different utilities have done as part of phase 2, and we've developed documents and guidelines that help them how to do this. Each of them picked a process that was important for them at the time. They developed an as-is process model and then to be. So I will show one example in the next slide, please. One example of these case studies that comes from City of Grand Rapids, where they looked at a process and they calculated that there is, as is model, the cost for the process is about $102,000, and utility would spend about 515 hours on review and another 300 hours for reporting. And you can see on the right that is the result of a 2B model that they improved in each one of these areas. So this is just one example of modeling, developing as is and 2B models, and then developing a strategy to go to an improved process. So at this point in time, I'd like to turn over to Scott Haskins, I think is next.
Yes, and if you could go to the next slide, please. So we've already heard in track 1 how we're planning to work, where utilities would work independently and focus on documenting and improving their own processes. And Mike and Cello took you through that modeling, the documentation of the processes, analyzing and improving their processes, attaching technology and roles and responsibilities to it, posting those models and improvements to a common knowledge base that's represented in case studies that others can have reference to and use on a common portal. What's different in track 2, in addition to further refining what Mike described in phases 1 and 2, is that utilities in track 2 would be jointly developing some best practices and applying those to special process areas, topic areas, areas of greatest interest. What we're in the process of doing, and Fadon is going to be sending something out, surveying participants to identify and help select what are the topic areas that the group of participants want to focus in on together. And what's different about it is that we would be accomplishing a portion of our common work through workshops in a workshop setting, starting with the Utility Management Conference. So we would form groups around each of the different focus topic program process areas that we are selected. And for each one of these topic areas, process areas, we would be developing 2B models for that selected area. And we would be applying through collaborative interaction, defining best practices that would be associated with that particular area. We'd be documenting those. We would be posting those to the portal. Next slide, please. And what we've already heard back from a number of you, and we'll be putting out a survey to get additional ideas and your sense of priorities for you. But one thing that we've identified was change management itself as a process. A lot of these process improvements involve change, engagement of employees, culture, teams, and so change management process is one of those potential topic areas. A second is capital project delivery. Half a lot of your costs are associated with capital improvement programs and delivery, and so the efficiency of those processes, the application of new technologies, and the application of best practices to project delivery is a second area. A third area would be development of asset management plans. A lot of you in the asset management world are developing those. Often that is organized in the value chain around types of assets in that value chain. And this is about how you develop asset management plans that identify what the assets are, what their condition is, what's the risk signature associated with it, and other data and information and valuable aspects of these plans, as well as the teams and team structure for dealing with them and the decision frameworks. And so this would be a process, a topic area where you could see from others what they are doing and develop some common to-be process. I should mention that in addition to doing things in a common way, there's also anticipated that you would go back to your own utility and further define, further tailor, those standard high-level business processes that we've identified to your own utility and your operations. So if we have a group of organizations that are involved in doing this, then we would have multiple case studies from each of the utilities that would identify how they are applying this in their utility. Enterprise risk management. What are the things that keep you up at night from a risk management standpoint? And applying some common risk methodologies is another topic area that is identified. The next one to keep this moving along is business case evaluation and prioritization of CIP projects. A lot of you have identified this as a challenge area. Some of the benchmarking activities that we've done have singled this out as a major opportunity area. Then looking at customer engagement and stakeholder management, looking at the interface to the outward-facing processes that you have in your organization and ways in terms of best practices, but also documentation of those customer engagement and stakeholder management processes. And the last one, just food for thought, is lifecycle management for IT systems. So the idea that we often have application by application by application, development happening for IT systems without, coordination across those IT systems and without managing the whole life cycle of those IT systems. So those are just some of in the survey that's going to be going out, or some of them that have come up, and we're looking for other ideas and where we want to hear about your priorities. So at the UMC, just over a month from now, we're going to be deciding on areas of interest. We're going to be forming groups, teams, and get to work on this and continue our work through, a workshop type of setting where after UMC, it's envisioned that we would be conducting these sessions at a utility site. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Mark Poling, who's going to talk about the benefits of the approaches that we're outlining moving ahead.
Thank you, Scott. As you can tell, we've put a lot of time and thought into this, and we've got some really great partners, including our utilities and our consulting partners. And we think phase 3 is really going to accelerate this project, including it'll provide exchange of ideas and experience with colleagues from different utilities. As you can see, for now, we've been building a base of learning how to use the tools that are part of this project, and it's really starting to pay rewards. And you saw that in the example of Grand Rapids. And now we're going to take that even further to begin looking between utilities to see what things we can learn from each other. We'll have an in-depth examination of important topics and business areas. Scott just outlined a number of the potential topics there, so we're really looking forward to seeing what other topics folks might have in mind and which ones come to the top. And then define best practices that can be applied within a utility. So as we go through this, what we're hoping to do is identify those things which, when we look at them and go, that is a really good practice, and that's one that we should think about adopting. So we're going to define these best practices among ourselves and then look to then push those out to our utility partners. The overall benefits to the water sector industry include those recommended best practices to serve as guidance to practitioners, and adopted and established standards for metrics associated with specific business processes. As you could see that Mike presented earlier, we can actually quantify business processes now. It's not just a description, and that's really what these tools allow us to do. And also the documentation of those business processes. It's amazing sometimes the things that we keep in our head and we just kind of know how things work. But in order to really make improvements, we have to know how those things actually work and how those things come together and form with the other business processes. So that includes format, notation, and hierarchy. And finally, the development of a dynamic and virtual centers of excellence. That's a lofty goal there, but we think this is going to be a great, phase 3 is going to be a great start to that. Next slide, please. So looking down the road, a strategic view on this, our UAIM's long-term future, we see a host of processes up to and including complete utility models. We have some partners that right now have committed to modeling their entire utility. So we're really excited about that, and we think that this is going to enable a lot of others to see that example and to be able to use some of those practices, as well as be encouragement for them to move forward in modeling their utility. That will also include, as I just mentioned, a series of vetted best practices. It's going to provide for us a much deeper understanding of our business, and that's something we all need if we're going to deliver value. A knowledge base that also brings the best of the effective utility management, the benchmarking, and other efforts into quantifiable improvements. And that's really one of the big advantages of the business process modeling notation. We'll have vetted and proven methodologies to improve our organizational cultures and people systems. This is probably one of the more challenging ones. We've been working at this one now for a few years. We have made some good progress, and we continue to do that because, of course, all of our business processes are ultimately executed by people. And we have to pay attention to those systems if we truly want to have some organizational transformation and deliver some real value. And finally, building this community of utilities that's dedicated to delivering quantifiable value to their citizens. And that's what we're all about, isn't it? We're mission driven. We want to serve our customers. We want to protect the environment, protect public health. And this provides a way for us to really get our arms around that as a complete utility. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Fidan.
Thank you, Mark. I'll be talking about how this all connects to WRF and the LIFT tools that we currently have. The LIFT for Management project is currently up on the LIFT Link platform. The LIFT Link platform is the online platform where you can discover LIFT-related technologies, utility needs, and most recently we have added projects. The LIFT for Management project is on there. It looks like this. It has all the related information, the phase 1, phase 2 summaries, the white papers you can see on here, how you can interact with the project in the LIFT Link platform. We encourage you all to log in using your username and password to follow the project. That will keep you up to date with the latest news related to the project, but also it has the web link, as you can see on this page. That links you to the LIFT for Management homepage, where we have the case studies we'll be posting that Mike mentioned. All the 10 case studies will be available there, as well as previous recordings and the list of all the utility partners that are participating in the project. And that leads me to how you can get involved. There are two options. One is for utilities and the other is for consultants. If you would like to be a utility partner and join this project to use all the tools and the models that have been developed, that is an option for all the utilities that are on the line right now today. And if you would like to be a consulting firm partner, if you are a utility and you're working with a specific consulting firm, you could encourage them to get involved and they will be able to help guide you through all the tools. And if you're a consulting firm that's already currently on the line, you can join and get other utilities that would like to participate in this project to participate in the LIFT for Management portion. And in phase 3, we'll be further developing the project, starting off with the Utility Management Conference, as the speakers have mentioned before. We'd be happy to have you participate with us and join us in Nashville, Tennessee. And if you would like to get involved, feel free to contact either myself or Chelo Vitasevic, and these are our email addresses to get started. And I'm going to pass it on to Chelo before we jump into the Q&A session. And just to remind you all, feel free to put your questions into the chat box, or if you would like to ask a question, raise your hand and I'll be able to unmute you.
Thank you, Fidan and Mark and Scott and Mike. And thank you for joining this webinar. This, as you can imagine, is a little bit of a labor of love for some of us who are involved. It was initially a little bit difficult to explain to folks what we're trying to do, but I am really so happy to see the utility partners who have taken this up and who are making practical difference in how they work. And I also want to say that with the talent that we have on board from utilities, it's really amazing. And when we have these workshops, it is just fun to watch. Initially, when I was preparing these meetings, I was concerned if I would have enough content there, but putting these folks into a room and they're all colleagues, that they seem they see similar problems, they just kind of naturally work together. So it was really very gratifying. We would love to have you on board. As the number we have, I think at least 15 utilities confirmed, and a number of them still considering to join. As we have more utilities join, you can think of this as sort of crowdsourcing innovation kind of effort, because every utility makes a contribution and makes something that is good for them, but it's also good for their colleagues and other utilities. So at this point, I just want to thank everybody again and get back to Fidan to see if we have any questions that have come in.
It looks like there are no questions, but Scott has a comment. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing just to add on is that there are a lot of new participants. We've had in phase 1, phase 2, a great group that did a whole lot of detailed work. And if you are a new participant or thinking that you'd like to be, you might say, how do I take 2 years worth of work and get up to speed so that I can participate in phase 3? And maybe others want to chime in on that as well, but the intent is to have an onboarding program that makes training available to you, gets you acquainted with business process modeling, and really gets you up to speed so that you can hit the ground running and participate actively in phase 3.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Fidan, was there a question? Fidan, was there a question?
There are no questions. We can end early, and we'll have the recording up on the web page as well, the Lift for Management page.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and the contact information is still up there, and if you could just let us know, Fidan or me, about your questions or concerns. We'll respond as promptly as we can, and thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.